Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the webinar Green Hydrogen in the Context of the Eastern Cape, Setting the Scene. This webinar is hosted by the Nelson Mandela University and is organized together with Professor Darrell van Greunen, who is the director of the Center for Community Technologies, and also Dr. Ossie Franks, who is one of the speakers and who will be speaking to you shortly. This webinar is the first in a webinar series that wants to provide a discussion and engagement forum for stakeholders in the Eastern Cape that want to address key themes and issues around the green hydrogen economy. The webinar series also aims to, in that way, provide accessible and appropriate thought leadership on green hydrogen related themes in the Eastern Cape, but also beyond. My name is Femke Brandt, and I am co-facilitating the webinar today together with Ronald Wessel, who will be mostly active in the chat room. And we are from Beneficial Technologies, which is a knowledge consultancy based in Johannesburg. The program for today is quite packed, and I'll go through it very quickly. We will start with, we have three speakers, two main speakers, and we will start with a short presentation by Dr. Ossie Franks from the Nelson Mandela University, who will speak about the Eastern Cape Hydrogen Energy Strategy and Implementation Plan. Then we have two very exciting speakers that are going to provide an introduction to the green hydrogen economy in South Africa, but also talk about what the emergence of this green hydrogen economy means in the context of the Eastern Cape, and address questions like what are the opportunities of the green hydrogen economy, but also what are other themes and issues that need to be addressed as this sector develops. And as we hear and hear a lot about this sector, we read about it in the news, in the Herald, for example. So our first speaker today, after Dr. Ossie, will be Dr. Rebecca Maseromule. She's the Chief Science and Technology Representative at the National Department of Science and Innovation. And she will provide an overview of the green hydrogen economy in South Africa. And after that, we'll be listening to Professor Gary Koekemoor from the Eastern Cape, who is also the lead climate resilience framework, the lead of the climate resilience framework project in the Nelson Mandela Bay. After the speakers, there's time for questions and answers in the chat. And we would really like to encourage you to use the chat while the speakers are presenting to address any issues or questions that you have, or share your comments, because in the question and discussion time, we will try and address as many issues as possible and also give the speakers a chance to address the issues. Please notify that this webinar is recorded and it will also be made available on the Nelson Mandela University's website and YouTube platform. And yeah, we are also very curious who is in the room. So I would like to invite all participants to engage in the chat and share who you are. What is your interest in the green hydrogen economy? And where are you based? So that everybody has a little bit of a sense that who is actually interested in these issues. So yes, I would like to actually hand over now to Dr. Ossie Franks to provide a little bit of context of how this webinar series and this platform came about.
Thanks. Thank you, Femke. Good morning, colleagues, and morning attendees on this inaugural webinar that we're hosting. And the webinar and the hydrogen knowledge platform that we've established will be able to host events like this. And it's been made possible by funding from the Department of Science and Innovation. In fact, one of our speakers, Dr. Rebecca Maseramule, who is going to be talking later, she was very instrumental in facilitating the initial funding, which made this possible, as well as funded the establishment of a project team, which is developing the green hydrogen strategy and roadmap for the Eastern Cape. And we're hoping that that work will be concluded and ready for dissemination in the third quarter of this year. So in addition to funding the important work of the strategy development for the province, we also felt that it would be imperative that a component of the funding make provision for what we're calling legacy projects, which will be able to endure beyond the time frame of the initial strategy development project. And as such, there are other components which I won't speak about now, but suffice to say that hydrogen knowledge platform is one of the legacy projects. So this will continue in perpetuity, based on people's interest to want to be able to engage and talk about it. The aim is also for us to have some kind of repository where we can have information that's readily accessible, not only by the university community, but also beyond private sector as well as civil society. So I think we also have an important role to play in broadening awareness about the hydrogen opportunity and its potential benefits, as well as the challenges related to establishing a hydrogen economy. But suffice to say, that's what I want to share with the colleagues. And thanks to Daryl and her team at the Center for Community Technologies for partnering with Beneficial Technologies in delivering this first inaugural webinar today. Thanks so much, Femke.
Thank you, Ossie, for providing that context. And I would like to hand over now to Dr. Rebecca Maseromule to present us an introduction or an overview of the green hydrogen economy in South Africa.
Good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, let me put it in slideshow mode. Okay, no, thank you so much, Ozzy, for your positive introduction, as well as Femke. And I would say once you see my presentation, you'll probably see why I felt it was really important to put in place some capabilities, especially in the Eastern Cape at the Nelson Mandela University for the hydrogen economy, especially given South Africa's potential worldwide. So if you look, I'm going to start with the global context, what's happening elsewhere, and then deep dive into the African context before going into what's happening in South Africa. And then I'll just give you a highlight on two really critical policies that are really giving clear instructions as to what South Africa is doing. And then last but not least, end up with pilot projects, of which some of the core projects are located in the Eastern Cape. So if you look at this map globally, there's quite a number of projects, and we call low emissions hydrogen. Some projects, the ones which are which are indicated by triangles, are what we call low emissions hydrogen projects. So you either use coal or gas to produce the hydrogen, and you capture the CO2 that's caused by it. And then the other extreme are what we call renewable hydrogen projects, which are based on electrolyzers, which are powered by either wind power or solar power. And if you look at globally, across the world, there's projects everywhere. Granted, quite a few projects are localized in Europe, but if you look at where you have the large scale projects, your largest projects are probably in Australia, There's a project that was signed on between Japan and Australia for, I think, about $4 to $6 billion. And then there's projects in China. I think majority of your electrolyzer projects are located in China, and then followed probably by quite a bit of work happening in Canada and North America. Now, we do have a couple of projects happening in the African continent. You have the Hyphen project in Namibia, as well as South Africa has quite a few projects. But if you look at just as of March 2024, over 50 countries globally have published national hydrogen strategies, and 6 are located on the African continent. So that's Algeria, Kenya, Mauritania, Namibia, Morocco, and South Africa. And most of these countries are members of the African Alliance for Hydrogen that South Africa is chairing this year. And then if you I just wanted to look at this figure of what does the deep trade in hydrogen look like by 2050? And if you look at it, the countries which are in blue are countries where they're going to produce more hydrogen than they than they consume, which means these are countries which are going to be selling hydrogen. So some of the usual suspects, Chile, Brazil, South Africa, Australia show up, but then there's quite a few countries which are going to be consuming hydrogen. I think the only concern is that the countries which are going to produce more hydrogen than they require is higher than the number of countries where they're going to be basically purchasing hydrogen for their own use. And then I just wanted to look at this snapshot, just looking at your African potential. I mean, throughout the whole entire continent, we have renewables, we have wind, we even have hydropower, which is, if you're looking at renewable hydrogen, it's probably the cheapest option because, your power plants, which are powered by hydro, are probably the cheapest in the world. But if you look at the capacity factors globally, African countries only fall behind Australia, Chile, and China when it comes to renewable energy potential. And then the Middle East falls in the end state. But I think what it says is that South Africa, just not South Africa, but Africa in general, does have a key role to play. And if you look at, how we're going to play this role, I mean, this is studies that were done, recently released a few weeks ago, that looks at if African continent only were to look at 15% of the global demand for hydrogen, we would produce about 7 millitons per annum by 2030, about 32 millitons per annum by 2040, and then 72 millitons by 2050. And like I said, in the northern part of Africa, you're going to be doing pipelines along the east, west, and the north parts of Africa, southern parts of Africa, including South Africa, looking at shipping hydrogen derivatives. And then there's a great opportunity, especially for South Africa, in terms of bunkering fuels, for trade routes and so forth. And then I think there's an expectation that also Africa will put a portion of that, not a lot, but a portion of that towards domestic demand. And then if we were to, export about 15% of the world's hydrogen globally, that would require about $400 billion worth of investment up to 2050. I think 90% of that investment will be after 2030, and then 15 billion per annum in terms of export value in 2050. And then I think what's most exciting is the 13 million job years that will be created by 2050 for the African continent. And then I think one thing that I want to kind of drill on is this issue of the cost of capital. Because green hydrogen projects are highly capital intensive in comparison to gray hydrogen, which comes from coal and natural gas. So coal and natural gas, or gray hydrogen, is basically the cost is very linked to the cost of the gas price. But with renewable hydrogen, your cost, your capital, and which is your renewables, your electrolyzers, your solar panels, or your wind turbines, is really where the most of your cost comes. And the concern is that on the developing countries, this is Africa and South Africa in particular, have a higher cost of capital. And with the increase, you have a 6% increase in the weighted average cost of capital, could lead to a 50% increase in the levelized cost of hydrogen. And the reason why I think that Nelson Mandela University is so important is because some of the risks you can manage, like project execution risk, inexperienced EPC contractors, limited workforce, experience in hydrogen. These are risks that Nelson Mandela University could help manage those risks and bring the cost down. So it may seem like a very little bit of reduction in cost and reduction in percentage points, but if it has an impact on your levelized cost of hydrogen, this is how South Africa or other countries in general get into the market around and getting their products purchased. So this hopefully is a plug-in for why universities are such an important part of your journey if you're going to be doing a hydrogen economy in the Eastern Cape. So again, drilling down to South Africa. So we talked about globally, it's happening. Everyone's excited. 50 countries have strategies. African continent also excitement. Also, the African continent in general just has potential. But in South Africa in particular, like I said, we have numerous policies which have been released. We talked about the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, the Green Hydrogen Commercialization Strategy. Even the Green Transport Strategy talks to hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. The South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, which is hopefully coming out soon, talks about the enabling the power sector through hydrogen production. And then the research, development, innovation is still so important to bring the cost down, because green hydrogen is much more expensive than what we call gray hydrogen. And then I think last but not least, in terms of the green just energy transition investment plan, one of the 3 pillars of that plan is actually a hydrogen component. And I think $800 million was actually allocated to hydrogen under the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan. So the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, which was launched in 2021, or which was approved by Cabinet in 2021, is really looking at having an inclusive, sustainable, and competitive hydrogen economy by 2050 in South Africa to ensure that we have just and inclusive net zero carbon economic growth for societal well-being by 2050. And around the time that we were post-COVID was really important, because we saw that there were quite a bit of poverty, issues of inequality, which were actually worsened by the challenges under COVID. And really the Hydrogen Society Roadmap was really around aligning stakeholders around a common vision on hydrogen-related technologies in order to create an environment where investments can be made by the private sector to unlock this economic benefits for the country. And we had 6 outcomes, which talks about, again, we always say hydrogen is one of the most flexible fuels, or flexible molecules. So you can improve your energy sector or power sector, green enhanced power sector in buildings, decarbonization of transport sector, creation of a market manufacturing sector for hydrogen products and its components. This is largely based on the work that we've been doing under the Hydrogen South Africa program for the last 15 years to create IP, decarbonization of heavy duty industry. So of course, green steel, aspects of chemicals in refineries, creation of an export market for hydrogen, green ammonia, and then actually this transition from gray to blue to green. So we have to acknowledge that we use quite a bit of gray hydrogen, especially in the refinery sector, but how do you move us through the use of infrastructure as well as reducing cost? And then subsequent to the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, there were quite a few, we had, I think, we had about 70 key actions. And actually one of the key actions under the Hydrogen Society Roadmap was the development of a green hydrogen commercialization strategy. And that process was, we had a green hydrogen panel, and the Department of Trade, Industry, and Competition actually took the charge and actually really started developing a strategy on green hydrogen. But one of the things I think the green hydrogen strategy does is it really is trying to create a new industry in the country. So we don't have a hydrogen industry in this country, right? So hydrogen is used in the refinery sector, chemical sector, but it's not widely used throughout the country. So the development of an actual industry is actually not an easy thing. So the commercialization plan was really critical to, again, ensure that we have a shared vision around how we're going to make it happen around green hydrogen, guide decision makers, private sector, really around positioning ourselves for exporting, green hydrogen, green hydrogen, green steel, sustainable aviation fuels, but also to ensure that we can maximize the social economic benefits for the country. And really had I would say they had 7 pillars, but one of the key pillars was export market first, domestic market to decarbonize, investment and finance, economic development, localization, just transition, and then ensuring that we have a we have a clear enabling environment for simulating policy and regulations. I think really the commercialization strategy spoke really to how much demand we're expecting, especially for exports. So based on the global market at the time that the green hydrogen commercialization strategy was put in place, and our potential, I think at this current time, we're only responsible for 1% of the global demand. We're looking at increasing our potential. So looking at either increasing between 1.9 and 8 million tons of green hydrogen per annum for export market. And then most of the shipping would be to either Europe, Japan, Asia, were the two main markets that we're looking at. Or those really the two main markets that are looking for, for energy, for hydrogen. And I think this is what's important to note is that quite a few of your organizations within Eastern Cape have started relationships. I think Hive, which has a green hydrogen project in Kuha, has signed memorandums of understanding with, I think, Japan. They've done great work with, I think, Port of Rotterdam and so forth. So I think the potential for the Eastern Cape government to probably lead, or Eastern Cape in general to lead on the hydrogen economy in terms of, going to the east is probably there. And then I think last but not least, so I think in terms of the potential, half of the, I would say 50% of the potential sits on the export market and 50% of the potential really sits on domestic consumption. And I think this is really speaks to the fact that I think one thing we don't realize is that South Africa is one of the top, it's not, let's say, at the level of China or US, but I think we're in the top 20, 30 countries globally in terms of energy consumption. So how do we use that towards, again, supporting our hydrogen economy? And then also, even with the challenges in the refinery sector, with us closing down refineries, what are the opportunities for hydrogen in the transport sector is something, especially to replace diesel, is an opportunity that we need to really start looking at. So again, the two pillars, domestic market and export market, are really critical. And then in terms of getting 7 million tons of, long-term growth of 7 million tons per annum of production by 2050, again, half would be domestic, half would be export market. We would need about $1 billion of investment to expedite green hydrogen export of 20 kilotons per annum. So this is actually going to be very extensive in terms of the funding that we need. So this is why it's really critical that we get our levelized cost of hydrogen down through reducing the risk of capital, purchasing a capital. Otherwise, our LOC levelized cost of hydrogen will be high. And then I think last but not least, I just wanted to stop with the fact that, in the context of really, so I've showed you about global, African, and national context, but really where the rubber hits the road is really in the catalytic projects. So in terms of the priority projects in the South Africa, there's the Bugabai, which is Northern Cape. There's the Saldanha Bay, which is looking at green steel and as well as green hydrogen. The Val, SEZ, the Kuha, SEZ, eThekwini, and Richards Bay. So just drilling in on Kuha, like I said, it's export focused because of the infrastructure that's there. You have access to the East and West in a really great way. But also I think with Transnet and other skills and capabilities, as well as Nelson Mandela University, I think this really puts Eastern Cape in a really great position to probably be one of the first movers when it comes to the export of green hydrogen or green ammonia to the rest of the world. So I want to end on this slide and say thank you so much for the opportunity, as well as for the opportunity to put in place the context and how you guys fit into the big global picture. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for this presentation. I'm really impressed how you compressed so much rich information in so little time and even ended in time. Thank you for that. And I also thought it was really interesting to hear how important the role of universities are in managing the risks and in trying to reducing the cost of hydrogen. So maybe we'll talk more about that later. I would now like to hand over to Dr. Gary Koekemoer. The floor is to you to take us to the Eastern Cape and talk a little bit about what this means for the province specifically, or start the discussion on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca, thank you for that great introduction. I'm not going to speak to any slides, but I wanted to kind of address it on 3 phases and introduce myself at the same time. So I lead a project in Nelson Mandela Bay on behalf of the Presidential Climate Commission, the PCC, that's looking at developing a climate resilience development strategy framework for the city. So I don't expect you to remember that, but basically what we're trying to do is develop a climate resilient pathways for the city to adapt and mitigate and build resilience in terms of climate change. Then I also sit on the local business chambers, the Nelson Mandela Bay Business Chamber, and part of their reindustrialization think tank, and looking at I particularly focus and chair a subgroup on the low carbon economy. And then the final thing is that I chair at a national level WESA's, WESA, the Wildlife and Environment Society's Environmental Governance Committee, and the local province, and have been an activist and advocate for environmental issues and climate change. And so those 3 perspectives give me a slightly different view and insight into the issue of green hydrogen. And I want to keep it local to Nelson Mandela Bay specifically, and by implication, the Eastern Cape. So from a climate change perspective, why are we interested in green hydrogen or green ammonia, the sort of a subproduct of that, is that it's very clear from the climate data globally that we are into threshold territory, that we are experiencing heat that we've never experienced before, and our city is experiencing winds and other changes in storms that are unseasonal. It's too soon to say that it's climate change, but it certainly isn't seasonal, and we're gravely concerned. So there's a real priority and focus that we mitigate, and by mitigation, the key opportunity there is to do away with fossil fuels. But we in terms of adapting to climate change, we're going to need energy. So you can't do away with fossil fuels and not have energy. And how do you produce that energy? In South Africa, I mean, CSR have done the studies. We potentially have 80% we can do with renewables, and we need something to fill the gap there. Now, a lot of people talk about gas doing that, but we aren't really an economy that's geared to gas. You have to pipe gas to the user, and we don't have that infrastructure in place, and it's unlikely that we have the capital and constructive ability to do that in a short period of time. So green hydrogen or green ammonia allows us that opportunity to fill in where renewables can't reach, and we are and so for that reason it's very interesting in that sense. The other issue is that green hydrogen essentially renewables, so sun and wind, we are blessed with great components of that in terms of the global framework, but we also it's a more equitable product in the sense that across the world it isn't all you need is water essentially for green hydrogen, and that's not but for us we're a water scarce country, so most of our stuff is going to be linked to the sea. So that also really starts bringing implications. So that's from a climate change perspective. From a local business chamber perspective, obviously one of the biggest issues that we've had over the last 10 years is unreliable energy. So the load shedding for us has created huge job losses. We have factories closing of 2,000 people at a time, and so we need reliable energy. And renewables has the potential to supply that, but again, not on a consistent basis. And so we have to fill in the gaps. So an ammonia gas plant in our city allows us that opportunity to fill in terms of where the gaps might be. So in my view, the best conversion that you have in terms of electricity use is not piping to the actual demand, but creating electricity and then using the electricity to supply across the country. The bigger issue for us in our city is that our industry is primarily focused on the auto industry and the component industry that comes with that, and so we have VW and Isuzu here, and we have something like 40 to 60% of the country's auto component manufacturers also based in our city. And so with the conversion from industrial combustion engines, ICE engines, across to electric-driven engines, and there's EVs and there's hydrogen versions of that, our city will go through a major industrial change. So our big transition is not going to be from renewables to from coal to renewables. Our big transition is going to be in the auto industry, and that will fundamentally reshape our economy. And we expect that we will lose jobs in that process because in an electric vehicle you don't need an exhaust, for instance. So the catalytic converter, the people making catalytic converters at this point in time, are going to have to find something else to make in that process. And we think that green hydrogen gives us a value chain, a new industrial value chain, to supplement or to work alongside the auto industry. So for us, that's a very attractive option, and particularly because we have two ports, which is a fairly unique feature globally. We have two ports here, and the one issue it also addresses is this issue of bunkering. So let me come just to the advocacy and activism role, and let me just acknowledge up front that a great amount of work has been done by the likes of EarthLife Africa and in locally East Cape Combined Environmental Forum in terms of contesting it and questioning it, and a lot of lessons have been learned from the work that they do. But the key aspects that we've been worried about, particularly in our area, and if you've seen the latest NASA photographs of the phytoplankton spread off our coast, is that we are very concerned about oil and gas exploration. So particularly off the Agulhas banks with seismic, and we want to avoid a deep horizon event because our sea resource is something that we haven't been looking after particularly well. And to add into that oil and gas is obviously an issue. But the problem is that a lot of people see oil and gas as driving the industrial engine of South Africa, and that it's a quick win, a low-hanging fruit. The problem for us is the consequence of that could destroy our ocean economy. And so we need an alternative. And that's why green hydrogen is a great alternative for us. It means that oil and gas, you don't have to explore. I mean, the IEA already has said that, but for the industrialists in South Africa, they're looking for the quick wins. We think the green hydrogen is a better option for them than something like oil and gas exploration. But the critical thing, for us in our bay, we used to have the biggest colony of African penguins. We don't any longer. And the reason for that is that we have a bunkering operation that is located right next to what used to be the prime colony of African penguins. And the oil spill issue is not so much the problem as the noise issue. And so we know that one of the key problems is that we've been overfishing, so we've been taking away the food source of African penguins. But noise, in terms of marine noise, has become a bigger and bigger issue as we study it and we understand it. And we know that fundamentally impacts our bay. Now, our bay is a biodiversity hotspot of global importance. And so the critical thing about green hydrogen is not just the fuel source, but also how you convert it into energy. So if you're using it in a combustion engine, there's no real wins to us because the noise factor still remains. But if you use it in fuel cell technology, and that's potentially what the marine industry will convert to, it overnight changes the noise factor within the seas. And that's a massive win for us in terms of environmental issues. So let me just finish with these three thoughts, is that there is no technology that we know of that has zero or neutral impact on the environment. All technologies impact the environment. And typically we in terms of industrial development, we only realize the real impact on the long-term basis. So there's a lot of energy around the front end. There's a gold rush. Everyone's trying to get into it. There's not a lot of consideration long-term of the impacts of that. But what has been clear in terms of companies like Hive is that they're paying a lot more attention to long-term impacts upfront and designing the systems to try and combat it. So for instance, one of the big issues is water consumption. They already have a desalination solution, is that they won't return the brine to the sea, and that's a really important thing. They will use the brine and convert it into salt that can be used by a local salt company. The other issue, obviously, that we have to then start thinking about is ammonia and hydrogen spills. We know that ammonia is highly toxic. How do you convert it? What happens if it goes into the environment? Those are new things. But the one key issue, and we see this in the fishing industry, we see it in the oil and gas industry, and we see it now in the hemp and dacha industries, is that capital-intensive industries benefit those that have capital already. And so the equity issue for us is a key concern, is that these are, as Rebecca said, these are capital intensive. So how do you not perpetuate the inequity that is in our country currently through new mechanisms? So if you look at fishing and if you look at oil and gas, there has been Black empowerment, but it's been to a very selected group of people, and your ordinary citizens, your communities don't benefit from that. And so so one of the things is, and we know this up front, and so we can design for it and we can look into it, is that we have to make sure that we get the equity right. We have to make sure that we get the environmental impact as minimal as possible. And we need to be thinking through just in terms of how we use this. So I think those are just some initial thoughts from my side. In response to it, we are cautiously optimistic about green hydrogen. If for us, it's a far better solution, obviously, to provide energy than oil and gas and fossil fuels. We have to stop that, but we need energy going forward. And how do we do that? And we think that this potentially has that possibility. Femke, thanks very much. That's it from my side.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary, for that input and really starting to raise several really interesting and important hydrogen-related issues. So I would like to open the discussion now to all of you, and also invite you to, if you're comfortable and if you want, please unmute and just engage us, either of the speakers, by sharing your questions or your thoughts just on what you've heard being presented now. I also wanted to hand over to Ronald, who has been looking what's been happening in the chat, just to see if there's already any questions or discussion points there.
Thank you, Femke. The questions around the platform and the slides that the speakers were using, that was answered in the chat. And also I noted in the chat that there's the Eastern Cape Civil Society is represented. So hopefully we'll hear from them in the discussion. And there's a question from Professor Janet Cherry asking, what are the realistic estimate of the number of jobs to be created at the local level by the green hydrogen economy? And specifically direct production jobs, not the value chain. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Gary, would you like to maybe first respond to that question?
Yeah, with pleasure. I can. I mean, I don't speak on behalf of the industry, but I know that we've engaged with them on the question of jobs. So if we take Hive Energy, what Hive Energy have indicated is that they, across the value chain, will create something like 20,000 jobs, but that's not just based in Nelson Mandela Bay. And I think that of that, something like 15,000 are in the construction component. So you're looking at about 5,000 in terms of permanent jobs, and in our city particularly, you're looking at probably about 500 to 1,000. So those are the jobs that industry, that company will bring. In terms of the industry itself, the value chain, we're unsure at this point what will happen. So if you start, so one of the potentials is that bunkering can switch from heavy fuels to green ammonia or green hydrogen. And if you have a plant here within the bay, we could do that. And because of as I mentioned, if it is the fuel cell technology, you avoid the noise component. So that will add value to that. It will build our maritime sector. Those are knock-on effects that I think any economist would have difficulty in terms of tracking at this point in time. But the real key thing for us is that it offers alternative employment for the loss of jobs that we anticipate in the auto industry.
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, that's very clear. Rebecca, would you also like to respond to the question of job creation?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the, we talked about the value chain, or at least the early stage of the value chain. Because South Africa is a water scarce country, one would do desalination. You would have jobs there. You would have jobs in terms of the renewables, the electrolyzer, and then even before it goes to what we call the gate, you need to compress, purify your hydrogen for use. And then I think in terms of the number of jobs, off the top of my head, I can't recall, but I do know that, like I said, you get probably your jobs are going to probably be highly technical jobs if your focus is on production of hydrogen only. But if you start consuming hydrogen domestically, is where you start getting what we call blue collar jobs. So the maintenance operations of fuel cell technologies, or technologies that use hydrogen. So that's why I think it's important that as a country we do have the aspirations around export, but that we have domestic consumption, especially if we want jobs, blue collar, white collar, and so forth. And then I think last but not least, I think one of the concerns that we're learning globally is that the number of people required to implement a hydrogen economy, this is globally, we don't have enough people. So I think it's important that we actually produce more than we need because, unfortunately, people are going to go where the projects are happening. And in the African continent, I think less than 3% of the projects which have been announced have gone to what we call final investment decision. I know 2 or 3 colleagues that used to work in South Africa over the last 2 years that have left to go to Netherlands, where a lot of the jobs are happening. So I think this, again, back to the university, I'm not getting paid by Ozzy and his team, but I think Nelson Mandela University is critical because you're going to need to we talk about the Hive project, but if you don't have enough people to implement those projects, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be able to implement those projects successfully. Thank you.
Thank you. Janet, Cherry, you're welcome to speak.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to follow up on that and ask about a little bit more detail about the manufacturing of inputs into this value chain. So I think Rebecca talked about electrolyzers and so on. I mean, my understanding is a lot of these inputs are imported. Like, so I know for renewable energy, I mean, we import most of the components that are needed. So I want to know what the potential is for actually establishing the manufacturing industries for the components for the green hydrogen value chain.
Gary or Rebecca, you feel free to unmute and address this. Yeah.
So if you look at the value chain, this speaks specifically to the electrolyzer. You have your catalyst, you have the membrane electrode assemblies before they get into the electrolyzer and even the balance of plant. Electrolyzer, I think the preferred, I would say technology, probably long term, is what we call PEM or protein exchange membrane electrolyzers, and of which is based highly on PGMs, which we have about 75% of the world's PGMs, but currently we're extracting PGMs, exporting it to other parts of the world, and then bringing back as finished products. We even do that with catalytic converters, I believe. So that's a great opportunity in South Africa. Under what we call Hydrogen South Africa programs, we produced close to 200 masters and PhDs over the last 10, 15 years. But also, we have training courses for technicians, fuel cell technicians. We actually use technicians from TVET colleges and University of Technology in our labs to actually train them how to create catalysts and MEAs and production. And then there's quite a few companies, SMEs, Chem, South Africa, you have Mitochondria, you have High Plat, Bambili, who are in the country. who can do small scale manufacturing of these components. And then I think in terms of, so that's looking to electrolyzer. And then in terms of balance of payments in EPC companies, we have quite a few which have capabilities around implementation or installation of technologies. But one of the caveats when you do have, like, let's say an electrolyzer, is that when a company sells an electrolyzer, they sell normally a containerized system, which is closed off. So if you get in there and you start fiddling, then you lose your warranties on your technology. So that's something we'll probably have to address. And maybe partnering with OEMs to manufacture in South Africa as a starting point will be critical, to get those jobs, or at least part of the value chain in South Africa.
Thank you. I see there's another hand. And before we go to Sonia, I also would like to emphasize that, so this is the first webinar in a series that aims to provide a discussion platform for all sorts of issues, even issues maybe that did not come up in the presentation now. And we are very aware that there's a lot of people in the room who've been around also in the sector and are engaging the sector from different positions in society. And we would just like to welcome you to contribute and also just comment on what you've heard or what you are doing in the Eastern Cape in relation to the green hydrogen economy or beyond the Eastern Cape. So please feel free to contribute in any kind of way that you want. So I would like to ask Sonia. Sonia, do you still have your question?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so my name is Sonia Scritch. I'm from the Eastern Cape, and the forum that is a Eastern Cape Combined Environmental Forum. I am a green hydrogen watcher. I've been a green hydrogen watcher since last year. So basically, I am looking at what is green hydrogen, how does it work, the disadvantages and the advantages. So I come back to the communities and report back about the green hydrogen. So it's my first time attending this webinar, so I wasn't aware that Nelson Mandela Bay is also busy with green hydrogen. So what I would like to do or to ask is for me to, if it's possible, that I have sort of an engagement with the Nelson Mandela University, whereby we can share information and get information about the green hydrogen, the knowledge that you guys have, and the knowledge that I have about green hydrogen and high energies, because I've been following them. And also that since I'm in the Eastern Cape, we are also looking at the green hydrogen when it comes to green steel, when it comes to in Mpumalanga, when it comes to Limpopo. There are also environmental activists who are green hydrogen watchers from that side. So I'm not only focusing on the Eastern Cape, but I'm also looking at other places, countries where green hydrogen is implemented. How does it affect or how good it is? So I would like to know more about it in a different way, if that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia, for that input. And yes, that's exactly what this platform is about. It's about sharing knowledge, addressing key themes related to green hydrogen, and also building a knowledge portal actually on the Nelson Mandela University's website. So we will share the link to that portal shortly. But beyond just sharing knowledge and content, we really aim to be in conversation with you and everyone here to also learn together and to learn from each other. Because like you say, people have been engaging and have been doing things, but they are not yet in conversation with each other and sharing and also learning from each other. So we are, I think this is really what we are here for. So I'm happy to say that you are also to hear that you are willing to contribute to the forum in that way, and stay engaged beyond this webinar also. I hope that addresses your question, but of course people from Nelson Mandela University can also address this and speak to this. And I see that Ronald also has his hand up.
Yes, I have a question around policy and policy coordination. We do know that there's a number of government institutions and departments that's been very active in facilitating the development of this sector. But Bentech is also working on another project related to green hydrogen. And in that project, we interacted with project developers recently. And one of them made a point to us. He said that they have a fairly comprehensive project. So it has a wind power component to it. And he said that they are quite frustrated because there is the capacity to manufacture those giant windmills in South Africa. But the policies, the tariff structures means it's actually cheaper to import the assembled wind mold, so to speak, rather than import certain components and manufacture them here. So they were quite keen to see that kind of policy change. So my question is just like, what are the kind of policy changes required? What can we expect in that regard? And what's the level of coordination and integration between different government departments?
Thanks for the question. I think the previous question from Sonia, I think it's more of she was just a comment to reach out to the Nelson Mandela University team. So I'm quite sure they'll reach out to you, Sonia, in the right prior form to communicate that desire. Ronald, in terms of the issue around coordination, the issue around the cost of importation of components versus a full system, I can't necessarily answer that question today, and why that cost is higher. I think with the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan, maybe some of those issues will be addressed. I know there were different working groups around localization skills for that working group, because I'm quite sure if the cost of, part of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan is to improve the opportunities for, I would say, localization of the renewable sector in general, especially on the back of, trying to export hydrogen or green hydrogen, green ammonia. So those issues, I guess, probably haven't been addressed, but are probably going to be addressed as part of that strategy document in its implementation. In terms of coordination, this is probably an issue that a lot of countries are suffering or, having an issue. And I would say that probably only a few countries, probably your Japans, your US's, your Germany's, probably have, and even I think UK have fully fledged, coordinating structures in place. But in most cases, a lot of them have been in the game for quite some time. And if you think even outside of their own countries, domestic issues, they're actually, having a lot of influence globally around hydrogen. For instance, Japan has a hydrogen energy ministerial that they use as a platform, or they did a G7 report last year that changed how we name hydrogen. We're no longer talking colors, we're talking in terms of thresholds and so forth. So I think to some extent, could be some frustration with the South African government, but I think that we are moving in the right direction. I think we're moving slowly, but the fact that hydrogen is part of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, in part because of the work of the PCC and the work they're doing in the Just Transition Framework, is a big deal, especially the fact that they're a very young organization. The fact that the Green Hydrogen Commercialization Strategy came out of the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, I think is a big deal, because most times people don't work that well together. And the fact that the Eastern Cape government is now looking at national level and then we're looking at, there's a Northern Cape strategy, an Eastern Cape strategy, I think there's an eThekwini strategy, means that these things are propagating down to the lower level. Whereas before, it takes quite a bit of time for the national level work to move to the provincial and even city level. So there could be some frustration, but I would say we're slowly but surely moving in the right direction. And then last but not least to that, I think that the presidency is putting in place efforts to coordinate and organize. But I think we have to be patient with ourselves. We're coming up for an election in a few weeks. Hopefully everyone's voting on the 29th. You're going to exercise your right to vote. So while we're in an election year, God, imagine election quarter, I would say, not a lot happens. So I think there's strong support for it across government, but let those processes unfold and then probably see what comes after, things settle a bit, and then see how fast government move towards putting ourselves into a more coordinated structure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see we have a few minutes left, and we have a few hands up now. So I would like to propose that we first listen briefly to Tina and Zoe, because you posted a question also in the Q&A, and that we then also listen to the comment or question of Yastil and Janet, and then give Gary, who also has his hand up, the final word. And please also keep posting your questions and comments in the chat. If we don't get to address them today, then we'll make sure that we'll address them in the future webinars. So Tina, over to you.
Thank you very much. This question is primarily directed to Gary. Gary, my name is Tina Nzo. I'm with the Wits School of Governance, and I'm doing some research on the just energy transition, and I've been focusing on the Northern Cape and the Eastern Cape, and I did some publications on the Northern Cape that ropes in the green energy roadmap, sorry, the green hydrogen roadmap. But I started to speak to some officials from the Eastern Cape, and I spoke to some officials from the Socio-Economic Council structure there. But then I couldn't really pick up clearly, the level of understanding of doing some policy adaptations when it comes to the provincial growth strategy. So that's why I want to get your observation in terms of, do you see any form of clarity and understanding when it comes to their policy roles? Because this question talks to issues related to the state's capabilities, to deliver the just energy transition, especially a highly technical field that is quite fairly new in South Africa, such as the green hydrogen economy. So I just wanted to get your observations and views. Thanks.
Thank you. So let's go to Yastil. Please unmute and make your contribution.
Sure. Thank you very much. Appreciated. And maybe just a quick comment and maybe sense of direction that we can engage on, myself, Rebecca, and some of the other stakeholders that have been engaging over the last 2 years on this topic of the penetration of stakeholder engagement, right, in the working groups and the other technical committees and things like that. Because, the concept of how our silo mentality could be a project risk failure element is something that maybe we need to consider. And like Rebecca mentioned, there are a lot of countries that are doing it well. They're doing it fluidly. They've got very intentional, arms of government that are handling these elements. And there are some discrepancies that we have, or some uncertainties that we have in South Africa from a political or socio-political perspective, but not necessarily from a technical perspective. So from a technical perspective, where entities like the one I belong to, I'm the senior manager for research and development at the Ports Authority for South Africa. So where we come from, and we engage intentionally with, tertiary institutions like Dr. Ozzy's NMU, and with Rebecca at DSI and some of the other CSIR elements as well. There needs to be intentional broad spectrum stakeholder engagement, where we seek to eliminate any of the gaps between our organizations and all the critical stakeholders, because DMRE will do something, DTIC is working with SABS, the presidency works, with the likes of Rebecca, DSI and Sanedi. So we have a lot of different proponents or components within this entire spectrum that are doing different things at different speeds. And I think we need to be more intentional about how we put all of these together. And I think that will start answering a lot of questions for a lot of the stakeholders that are, upstream and downstream of where the sort of brains trust for green hydrogen is going to come from for South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you for your contribution. And given the time, I would like to ask Janet to keep your comment very brief, please.
Yes, sure. Very briefly, I was just responding to the issue about coordination on policy, and to say there's also quite a lot of policy being done at the moment at SADC level, at regional level, about green mineral value chains and how that feeds into this process. So for us, it involves nationally DMRE and DTI both coming to the party on this and coordinating their efforts. And my concern is that I think DMRE is all over the place. It's trying to do everything, and it's not taking a clear position on fossil fuels and support for development of renewables. So that would assist. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you very much. Then I would like to ask Gary to also keep your response as brief as possible.
Sure. Thanks, Femke, and thank you for the opportunity. Just in brief, to give you a local perspective, when we engage with industry and others, the two key stumbling blocks is policy certainty and cooperation with state-owned enterprises like Transnet. So the hydrogen has to go through a port, and that has to be made a priority. And the feedback we're getting is that there isn't the kind of level of cooperation that they anticipated. But there have been changes recently at Transnet, and so maybe that changes. The other thing is in terms of policy certainty. So not just in terms of green hydrogen, but also electric vehicles, other types of so sort of the new technologies, is that we seem to be a bit behind on that. And just to say that, you know, we have an auto industry because of the incentives that we provide to the auto industry. We produce less than 1% of the world's global cars in our country. So it's a very small chunk of the pie. And the only reason that we're able to do it because of the incentives that we offer. In terms of our global positioning, we sit at the bottom of Africa. We are 3 weeks away from the major markets generally, whereas countries like Morocco are 3 hours away. And so that advantage, for those countries, we have to understand and build that into our policy things. Now, with green hydrogen, it's slightly different because we have a major shipping route that comes past our coastline. And there's a real potential of the Suez drying up and not the Suez, the Panama drying up and the Suez being too unstable. So there's a potential of driving a lot more marine traffic around our coast. And in that sense, we're well positioned in terms of green hydrogen, but we have to, and that's perhaps where this project can help, is drive the policy certainty for investors and others. So that's a key first taker advantage that we really have at this point in time, because in 5 to 10 years' time, this industry is going to be settled. And the Middle East is making a big play because they understand oil and gas is disappearing as their key advantage, and they're investing heavily in this type of technology. So we have to move, and we have to move quickly to realize the opportunity. Thank you very much, Femke. Thanks for the questions. It's been a pleasure participating.
Thank you so much, Gary. And Rebecca, do you have any pressing last comments, closing words that you would like to share before I close the session?
No, I'd just like to say thank you so much for the opportunity. I would say that probably our best, one of the resources we don't often, we talk about our sunshine, we talk about, our wind, but probably one of our best resources is probably South African ingenuity. Don't, just because you're not moving as quickly as possible or as quick as others would like you to move, when you move, you always move. We looked at the World Cup, we look at when South Africa comes together. So don't forget that. That's why I have a very firm belief. 15 years ago, when not many countries were talking about hydrogen, South Africa embarked upon a process for a Hydrogen South Africa program. So I think let's believe in ourselves and, just keep on marching forward.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for those words. And thank you in general to our speakers, but also all the participants that contributed to the discussion today. By way of closing, we would like to say that we will be continuing facilitating webinars and also maybe face-to-face discussions at some point in the Eastern Cape around key hydrogen themes. And themes that we already thought would be really interesting and important to include are some of the things came up today: technology and engineering, financing and markets, socioeconomic impacts, climate change and the just transition, and the policy and regulatory environment of green hydrogen, of which we just already started addressing some key issues that are important to discuss. So from now on, the Nelson Mandela University is building a hydrogen knowledge platform. This is on their website, and you can see the link here, and the link will also be posted in the chat, where available content and knowledge resources will be shared. And you're very welcome also to contribute here or to go to the knowledge portal to make contact and ask your questions or share what issues you would like to address in the coming months and weeks in this in this platform. So you could also directly email Professor Darrell van Greunen, of which the email address is also on this slide. The next webinar will be on Tuesday, 28 May, same time as now, the day before the elections. And we'd very much like to see you there and continue engaging each other on the green hydrogen economy in the Eastern Cape. Thanks, everybody, and have a lovely Friday afternoon.